I finally caved and I finally sat down and I started watching The Boys, and man, am I glad that I did it. The hype for this show, I completely understand. Today, we're going to be talking about season 1 of The Boys, what I thought about it. I'm going to be going through all the plot points and we're going to talk about it together. And as always, guys, I would love to know what you guys think about it down below afterwards. Spoilers ahead. Keep that in mind. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another video. If you're new here, my name is Kyle. I am your guy with many YouTube channels. Let's talk about The Boys. So, starts off, and to be honest with you guys, I had no clue what to expect when watching this show because the only reason I turned it on, I didn't know anything about The Boys. I just knew that people loved it and it was a really, really big show. I was going to watch House of the Dragons, but then when I realized that not all of the episodes were out yet, I was like, okay, I'll watch something else, and I have my baby in my hands. I was just sitting on the couch. I was like, okay, I'll start The Boys. I heard that's good. We start off with Huey. Okay, we start off with Huey, and he's having he's working at a radio shop or whatever it was, a tech shop. His girlfriend comes in. They're talking about spending life together. They're talking about living together. Everything seems peachy. Getting nagged a little bit, and we kind of get into a gauge already. And the writing for the show is phenomenal, by the way. We kind of get into an idea already about what type of person Huey is, because she's like, you never do anything. You're scared. Kind of this stuff. I don't remember exactly because, of course, like there's a lot of information to process with the show. But then all of a sudden, girl steps on the road. They're holding hands. Boom! She explodes. And then again, I had no idea what to expect with this show. I knew it was, I like from the thumbnail, I knew it was a superhero show, but I didn't expect, like, as gory as it was, this girl just exploded in front of him, and Huey's looking at her, looking down. His hands are still holding her hands, and you see A-Train, but we, of course, don't know it's A-Train at the time. He's looking like, I just gotta keep going. I just gotta keep going. Nothing. Doom, gone. Like, I was sitting back, I'm like, oh, I had no idea what to think. So we then see Huey suffering a little bit of mental trauma. And then, of course, lawyers come up and offer him about $45,000, $50,000. It was something along those lines, which it's just as a settlement, and he didn't want to accept it. He's hesitating. He's unsure. He doesn't know what's going on. And this is what I loved about The Boys, okay? This is what I love about the show. It's like, I get that the show's like, what if superheroes are real? But this is actually how it would take place. I'm not saying that everybody would be evil. I'm not saying that, but not everybody's perfect. Everything would just be a PR stunt. Something like A-Train could absolutely happen. And what would happen, especially for these people that are so high up and used for social media clicks and advertisements, it would be thrown under the rug. This is what I love about it, because this is something that is absolutely true. So we then move on. We're introduced to Annie, which I assume that we're going to be following Huey's and Annie's journey, but we definitely follow a little bit more of Huey's journey. But of course, we figure out that Annie is this new superhero named Starlight. She has just been accepted to joining this brand new superhero group, and because I can't remember if one of the superheroes retired or if they died. I know that's a big change, but they didn't shed a lot of light on it, so it doesn't matter. Starlight is this new superhero. She's introduced to the Seven. She's one of those great girls who just wants to do good and save people. So she's shown around by the Deep. She's introduced to people. She goes up to the Seven's headquarters, and she was a fan. But now what happens is we figure out that, okay, superheroes aren't so great, because the Deep starts manipulating Annie immediately into what we later figure out is oral sex. But at the time, I didn't know what happened. I don't know if it was suggested, but I wasn't really sure whether he assaulted her. And I get that, like, you can kind of consider that assault. I'm just assuming, like, I'm trying to use the nice word, the R word, you know, that happened. Or if they actually hooked up with each other, or if it was just oral. And we later figured out that she ended up giving him, I'm trying to use YouTube-friendly terms, a BJ. I haven't said a BJ since, like, grade 8, dude. That's crazy. But again, I'm trying to be careful for YouTube. So the Deep, we figure out, is a deeply, deeply horrible person. Annie was this person who wanted to just do good. And this is the beginning of the downfall, or the supposed downfall of Annie, because from where I'm at, I watched one episode after season 2 at the time of recording this video. So seems like she's completely lost faith, but she might regain that as time goes on. But it's really, really horrible. But then we're introduced to Butcher after that. Now, Butcher runs into Huey, and he offers a chance from Huey to just expose the Seven. He wants to work with them, and he kind of, I can't remember if he came in, he said that he was an FBI agent, something along those lines. He presented a card. It was a fake card. So what happened was Huey ended up leaving work, and Butcher ended up bringing Huey to one of those Soups Club, and this is what they call them in the universe. They call the superheroes Soups, and this is where Butcher was trying to tell Huey, you will not believe what they get up to. And like we saw with Annie, you see that a lot of these people are weirdos they're freaks. The first thing that I saw was a guy shrinking himself and jumping into a box. Like, I'm like, oh my god. So they were all doing these crazy, crazy things. They're just really messed up in general. It's one of those clubs that they do all this stuff at. I guess there's different soups clubs around the town, the city. I actually don't even know where it's taking place at. But in this, Butcher also mentioned to Huey that these soups are horrible, horrible people, and this is the beginning of kind of the flawed logic of Butcher, because obviously not everybody's bad, and we see this with Annie later on in the show, and I would imagine it's going to come up again. But what Butcher shows Huey is A-Train laughing about Robin's death. Just talking about like, oh my god, I swallowed one of her molars, and then I ran through her like it was nothing. All of a sudden, there are guts in my face, something along those lines. And then Huey's watching them. Robin's death is fresh still. Somebody he loved, somebody he was going to spend his life with. And they're laughing behind a table for him, which is crazy. So Huey gets all of the motivation that he needs to work with Butcher, and this is the beginning of a very, very fun relationship and a very fun journey. I didn't think The Boys was going to be about people that aren't superheroes. But regardless, really cool. So anyways, the plan get kissed into gear. Butcher asks Huey to take some settlement money and then go to the 7 Tower and end up placing a bug, which Huey at the beginning initially refused, but then we figure out that he ends up being all for it. After that, we find Huey and Annie just meet each other by just happenstance, by circumstance. Like, just nothing was happening. They both ended up having something horrible in their lives. Huey just lost Robin. Annie just got taken advantage of in the most horrible way possible. They're sitting down and they end up speaking to each other. They end up consoling each other. And what happens is they both end up kind of motivating each other to stand up for themselves, get better. Like, just sitting around isn't going to do anything. They just need to face their challenges, right? And this is, again, the beginning of a relationship that will end up coming to be, of course, right? Huey ends up going back to Butcher, saying that he will do it. He goes, he has that whole mission where he goes back up to A-Train. He needs the apology right away, shakes his hand. He ends up placing the bug, even though there was a couple problems with it. But the problem is Translucent saw, and Translucent, of course, is the guy who turns invisible, and Translucent gets curious. So Translucent follows Huey all the way back to work and then confronts him, and this is our first, like, real problem with a soup, right? This is the entire first episode. It's been so long since a show really captured me this much at the very beginning, because all of this happened in one episode. One of the best pilots I've ever seen, because, again, one of the reasons why I hate watching shows, I hate getting through that initial stage, and I hate having to wait for the show to, like, really, really pick up. The Boys didn't have that issue with me. It picked up right away. So Translucent follows Huey back to his job, starts trashing the place, but then Butcher comes in, and I think it was a car. Butcher comes in, saves the day completely, and what ends up happening is Huey gets the balls to attack back as well. They end up capturing Translucent. So now they're stuck in a situation where they have a superhero captured and in a trunk. They need to drive away. But before this episode ends, we're also brought to Homelander, who throughout the episode was shown to be the only guy that was actually really a stand-up superhero. He's like the Superman of the group, right? We see him and he just downs a plane. Like, okay, so are all of these superheroes bad? Of course, Annie is the only one that really stands out, but man, what a pilot episode that was. Everything that I just talked about happened in the first episode. I loved this show so far. We're then brought into the next episode where we're introduced to Stillwell, and I don't recall if we actually saw him in the first episode, but he's this guy who can end up shape-shifting, and it was disgusting what I saw. So there's this little side story about the Deep finding information to kind of prosecute the Homelander, because Homelander, of course, shot down that plane, but then Stillwell ended up sleeping with somebody that he needed to make that all end up being okay. He shapeshifted. He just wear this blindfold and then turned into a guy, which was really funny, really weird to look, because you hear like the kind of sound, right? But of course, Annie, we're brought back to the story with Annie, and Annie is working with the Deep. She doesn't want to work with the Deep, but of course, it's the beginning of Annie kind of being controlled by PR. And Annie stands up for herself a little bit, kind of like Huey did, has a little bit of change of heart. So she promised, or something along those extent, she threatened him that if he ever tried to touch her again or allude to anything, she would straight up kill him. And we kind of see a look in the Deep, and I don't know if they're going to continue the storyline, but we're going to talk about it towards the end of the season, because they kind of go, oh, poor Deep. Poor Deep. We feel so bad for the Deep. He's just somebody who's struggling. Like, as if I care that this dude's struggling, right? He molested Annie. Like, who cares? But after that, we are brought to another sexual kind of assault. Again, I have to worry about putting those two words together for YouTube, right? where Annie saves the day from a girl she was about to get taken advantage of by two guys, for lack of better terms, and she starts just beating the crap out of the guy because, of course, she has that experience now, right? But of course, somebody, and this is what I loved about the show, this would so happen in real life. This would so happen. She'd be beating the crap out of somebody who is literally trying to RAPE a normal, innocent girl, and people would record it and be like, oh my god, look what Annie's doing. Look what Starlight's doing. She's beating up that poor guy. Like, did it ever occur to you that Annie might be beating him up for a reason? That's what happens, man. Nobody ever talks about, like, what people did to get beat up, you know? Crazy to me. Of course, like, random stuff like that happens, but more often than not, it was kind of warranted in my opinion. Of course, that entire thing goes viral, and Annie ends up being actually the person who is kind of bashed upon for bringing bad PR to the Seven. Like, crazy. This is exactly what would happen, right? But then we're brought back to Translucent, and after a various series of events of them trying to kill Translucent because they can't, they figure out a way by, after looking through a turtle, that they actually put, like, the Thanos meme. You know the Thanos meme where it's like, hey, we're going to put something up his butt and explode it? Well, they actually did it this time around. They ended up shocking him, knocking him out, putting C4 up his butt, and after distracting Homelander because Homelander was looking through for Translucent, actually, Huey ends up letting him out, and he's got the C4, and they have this, like, really, really tense moment where he's like, you just got to let me go, and this, like, they start, like, Translucent, of course, is trying to bribe Huey into letting him go. Huey doesn't want to kill anybody. Huey has a huge issue with this, and this is something that we see Huey kind of develop as a character. And all of a sudden, we think that he's going to let Translucent go. Huey blows him up. And the show's so gory, dude. It's crazy. Like, just absolutely everywhere. Just destroyed Translucent completely in an instant. Let go of the C4. Crazy, dude. Great. Another amazing episode. The show's something else. But I apologize in advance. I don't know if this really hurts making the video at all for your viewing experience. If it does, let me know in the comments. I would appreciate that. But I do have to end my recording right now. So next time you're going to see me in the next clip, I am going to be probably in different clothes. I'm going to finish recording later on tonight. I got to take off for a bit. Something just came up. Sorry, everyone. Sorry about that, everybody. Anyways, let's continue on to a short clip with Huey and his father. And he's finally come home because he's disappeared pretty much after Robin. He didn't tell anybody he quit his job. And he's been pretty well absent from his father's life. And this is where we kind of see for the first time that Huey is changing, because his father's talking to him like, oh my god, you love this show, we just do this together, let me cater to you, let me do all of this stuff for you. And then Huey's like, I don't like doing this, I need to do more with my life. Like, he's kind of a changed man. And I would imagine that you become a changed man after you end up murdering someone, obviously, right? But he ends up being a little bit of a piece of crap to his father and kind of runs out on him. Like, I would imagine if you live with your father, you kind of owe it to him to tell him where you're going and what you're doing. But at the same time, I understand why Huey hasn't really been opening up to him. But anyways, circling back over to Annie starts to gain a little bit of publicity because people actually liked what she did. And this is where we start with the whole women power thing. And it's not the women power thing in like what most shows do today. It's so fascinating, and it's something that I would love to like explore as we move down this conversation with the boys over here. But what happens is, of course, everybody starts loving Starlight. So what the PR team starts doing is making Annie wear a revealing costume that she absolutely hates, and she's looking like absolutely amazing in this other costume, right? But of course, it's showing off pretty much all of her goods, right? But this is why another thing that I think this show is so well written, because again, it's real. And I can only imagine all of the people that are in Hollywood right now who start off and just like want to show off their acting talent, right? They come in, they want to be normal, they want to be a good representation for women, and what what the people in charge end up doing is threatening your job unless you do what they want, and that being just selling yourself, selling your body, selling sex. And that's what's happening to Annie. And I found it fascinating how we're seeing her get destroyed a little bit more and more. Little pieces of little chunks of her being taken out, and she's kind of transforming into this really pessimistic person. The whole world was under the assumption that these superheroes were chosen by God, and they were chosen by just they have a better mission than themselves, right? They're special people. But in reality, and what we figure out down the road a little bit, is it's just a bunch of babies being jacked up on this crack-like substance. So they figure out that, I think, to use Butcher's words, they're just a bunch of junkies. But either way, they end up talking. They need to figure out a way how to get this Compound V drug, and what they obviously need to do is get into Popclaw's residence, figure out something there, because that's where the cameras are. They need to figure out just a way to get it. But then we're brought into another scene where we're kind of shown that A-Train just is more jacked up on this stuff. He's a little bit insecure about himself because he needs the compound V to win a race. He needs more. He needs to be faster. He needs to be more powerful. And you can see that this legitimately is a drug because the way that A-Train looks at him, it's like, oh, compound V, need the compound V, need the compound V, just like a crack addict would kind of act about their drugs. But then this is where A-Train messes everything up because he uses this facade of this is what the PR team wants, which, I mean, it's totally possible, but the guy's a little bit of a piece of crap, so I don't really believe him. So he went on the mic after winning the race and was like, hey, ladies, I'm still single. Whatever you need, I'm here for you. And he started talking about that stuff, which obviously just turned Popclaw into a mess. Kind of like mentally checked out from a relationship. And this is the time where she ends up actually walking out on him a little bit. I don't recall if they actually broke up, but they spoke about it. Regardless, she ends up having this disgusting scene very uncomfortable scene, okay, with this landlord because, you know what's funny? Out of all of the clips my wife could have walked into, this is the clip where she walked downstairs and I was watching The Boys. And, you know, when she was literally saying like, oh my God, you're a filthy little, you know, and kept going with that. Who likes to, yeah. So the landlord died as we all would like to die. And then what Popclaw didn't know about was the entire thing was caught on camera. So Butcher ended up using this as blackmail to have her as an informant, right? Interesting part. But before that, we cut to Homelander. And Homelander is the one who found Translucent's remains. It's in a box. And it just says, coming for you. A message from Butcher. Was that a smart idea? I don't know, but man, this show's still good, dude. In the meantime, we're then brought into this new character that the team referred to as the female. They kind of figure out that she's a test subject, and they kind of take her captive, kind of not take her captive. Frenchie ended up really taking a liking to this girl, felt really bad for her, had a little bit of a heart-to-heart with her. Also, Huey and Annie went on a date, and Huey is being a little bit dishonest to Annie. They go bowling. He's trying to figure out more about what she does. He's trying to figure out how they can talk about Translucent and kind of stuff like that, and he ended up bugging his phone at Butcher's request when he didn't really want to, and he doesn't think that this is the point where he's kind of figuring out that Annie isn't like the rest of the soups, and this is where Butcher's logic is flawed because he is just saying, she's a soup. Who gives a crap about her, right? And something else that I forgot to mention about that female is in that entire thing, she was part of this Compound V supply chain, which they kind of blew up, and then A-Train kind of went haywire. And something else that I forgot to mention is with Popclaw, the reason why she went on this crazy sex train was because of her deciding to use Compound B herself and was kind of just completely jacked up. So A-Train has Popclaw go into hiding while he ended up searching for the female. Now circling over to the Homelander side of things, Homelander and Maeve are now sent to an aircraft that is going down, and this is where you really start to see what kind of a crazy, horrible person Homelander is, and you actually have like a little bit more of an insight into Maeve as well, because Maeve wants to save all these people. Maeve even wants to save one little girl she can, and Homelander is kind of like, okay, what's gonna happen if one gets out? They realize, hey, we didn't save everybody. I was acting like this. So this is the first time that we really saw Homelander being as evil as he is, because everybody thought that he was there to save them. And he's like, you set the F down. You set the F down right now. And he was like threatening. His eyes got all red, and he's having these really crazy moments. And I gotta say, whoever plays Homelander, I only watched one season of this show, and I would go as far as to say he is one of the greatest actors of all time. The way he can be scary, the way he can be calm, the way he can be America's hero, you know? This guy can do anything, and he's so convincing in doing so. He is one of the greatest actors I've ever seen, because he switches from, and it's so fascinating too, where it's like, hey everybody, nothing to worry about. You betcha, kid. We're over here. Everything's gonna be taken care of. We're saving you. And then it just goes into complete scary rage, which I loved about this. So long story short, they ended up having the plane go down because Homelander wanted the plane to go down, and Maeve wanted to save even just a little girl. They couldn't save anybody, and Homelander ended up using this to get superheroes or soups into the military, and that was like a little bit of the goal behind the scenes in the show, right? And Maeve is just grieving. She's having a really hard time grieving because of it, and you can see that she knows what Homelander's like, but there's nothing she can do to stop it. Homelander decided to let that plane go down. That's exactly what's going to happen. We're then brought over to a couple small plot points where they go to this church camp or this church get-together where the goal is for Huey to meet this guy named Ezekiel, who is their next lead for Compound V. And also, we realize that Maeve has had a past relationship with another girl who she goes and visits because I wasn't really sure if it was because she started drinking or if she was grieving or needed somebody to talk to, but the biggest takeaway from this whole first part of the next episode over here is Butcher really, really cares about his family. So he goes to visit his dead wife's sister, or supposedly dead, right? And we see that Butcher really, really still cares about his dead wife. We didn't hear much about it, but we're going to learn quite a bit We're going to learn quite a bit of it. But fast forward a little bit because I don't think all of that really matters too much at this moment over here. We're fast forward over to A-Train, who shockingly kills Popclaw. He tried to make her tell her the truth and got upset and jabbed her with a bunch of needles all at once because, of course, A-Train has the speed of it's Quicksilver, I guess you could say. But then after all that, we circle back to the church get-together. I'm almost sure it was Christianity. I don't know if they actually said it, but from the way they were speaking, it really seems like it was Christianity. It could be Catholic or something like that. But Annie ends up getting Huey a backstage pass to go meet Ezekiel, and Huey, after saying that he can't do this over and over and over again like we've seen him do so many times so far, Huey ends up blackmailing him, but he also runs into Homelander over here, which is very, very scary. And I still don't know the way that I think that this went, because of course he was afraid to get baptized mostly because of that Homelander was doing it. It's crazy to me that Homelander was the guy baptizing people, right? And he kept holding Huey underwater. Obviously, I don't know if it was a message. I don't know if it was because Huey didn't necessarily belong at the back with all these important people, or if he just likes seeing people suffer a little bit or squirm. I'm kind of thinking the latter on that. Could be totally wrong about that. But anyways, Huey ends up successfully blackmailing Ezekiel. He gets the information he needs about Compound V, but then the biggest part of this episode and one of the biggest parts of the season comes after that, where Annie is sent on stage to have this giant scripted presentation. She gets up there, starts talking, and to be honest with you, at the beginning of it, I was kind of like, oh, it's going to be one of those things, because how many times have we seen this where they give a speech, it's all scripted? What am I doing here? Don't you people know, like, one of those things? But she actually killed it, man. All the actors in this show are actually, like, really, really solid. So she ends up going off about her losing faith, having all of these problems. You don't know what she's been through these past few months. She doesn't know if there's a God up in the sky, right? And she finally opens up about someone, and I'll say exactly what it was, like shoving their dick in her face. And it was after arguing with her mother, after doing everything that the PR wanted, and it ended up being this I'm done listening to people thing. You have no idea what I've been through. And it ended up being a hit, thankfully, which makes sense, to be honest with you. If somebody had a speech like that, it definitely would be a hit, especially somebody standing up for what happened to her, right? Huey ends up sympathizing with her a little bit. They get into a little bit of an argument, but then Huey actually opens up to Annie about Robin, and seemingly everything's okay after that, but that was such a powerful moment over from Annie and Starlight as a character. Meanwhile, Butcher and Mother's Milk go to a hospital, and this is where we find out that actually Compound V is it being injected into infants. So the superheroes aren't chosen by God. They aren't born that way. They're shot up. They're babies who have been captured or given to, whatever it may be, or sold, I don't know, and they're shot up with Compound V. Crazy to think about, but I could actually see this happening. This is the part of the show that is fascinating to me, because this I could see happening. If technology is advancing day by day, I wouldn't be shocked if we ended up getting superpowers in the next 10 years, for real. I really wouldn't be shocked. And then I would not be shocked if this whole thing happened, right? They capture babies, shoot them up with this thing called Compound V. So what Butcher ends up doing is saving the day with the Homelander type baby and shooting lasers out of her eyes and cutting down people. They escape, and other than that, we're brought to the female who we figure out she's a superhero because she ends up getting wounded, but her wounds end up healing immediately. But anyways, the boys learn that Vought, which I actually don't know if I've mentioned Vought yet, but it's the company behind Compound V. They have been using charities to smuggle vaccines, which is actually Compound V or Compound V disguised as vaccines, to have been making these super babies. So it is an entire system that the public doesn't know about. Shocker, right? But then we're brought back to Annie a little bit, right? And Annie has been blackmailed by Stillwell to saying, like, you cannot do that again. You need to be the good girl that you are. You need to just go. You need to do your PR stuff. You need to be Starlight, be that image, go trending. But she refuses. She stands up for herself. She doesn't want to be this. That's not her. She doesn't want to humiliate herself anymore. And she wants to just help people, and she wants to save people. So she ends up coming back a little bit because she was threatened to be kicked out of the 7 and all that stuff. She's like, Okay, if you fire me, how are they going to feel about that once you fired me after reporting my sexual abuse, right? And then they're kind of stuck there, right? But we're brought back to the deep, speaking of assault, and he has been made to publicly apologize, of course, right? And he's been sent to Ohio. And this is where I didn't really like what the show did, to be honest with you, because I have a funny feeling that the Deep is going to have this big moment, right? This big moment of comeback where he realizes what he's done and then becomes a better person after that. And I'm sitting here like, no, if you shoved your special little thing into a girl's mouth, there is no saving you. There is no changing you. You deserve nothing but the worst, because that's one of the worst things that you could do to a person. And I have a feeling that he's going to have this big redemption arc. And nothing's going to ever make me like him. I could care less what he does for moving forward. He could cure cancer. I don't care. He's a piece of crap, man. So they're kind of presenting this whole thing like the Deep, like, oh, feel sorry for the Deep. The Deep's been kicked out. Nobody likes the Deep. Like, yeah, nobody likes the Deep, obviously. So in the meantime, Butcher ends up bringing Huey to a support group for people who have been affected by soups. And after a whole talking stick type thing from Breaking Bad, like the talking bear, Butcher ends up having a little bit of a lash out moment where he's like, what are you guys sitting here learning to accept all of this? Your spine doesn't work. Your face is messed up. You should be out there with a machine gun trying to gun these people down, which honestly kind of makes sense, but the public doesn't know the soups like Butcher knows the soups, right? They'll look at them as these good people. And this is where Huey kind of talks to him. They both leave, and he's like, what's going on? What's happening over here? And this is where Butcher ends up dropping the bomb that Homelander straight up, did the thing to his wife. He opens up with the whole story, which is insane. I was like, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense now, doesn't it? That makes a lot of sense about why you're so against soups, why you hate them so much, why you're so hell-bent on destroying Homelander. He goes into the story talking about how they were working together, Homelander, and she ended up going with Homelander and then coming out and sitting by herself for 3 hours and then disappeared, which either Homelander killed her or she ended up killing herself after that, which was a huge bomb to drop from Butcher. So that's the motivation. That's why he's doing everything, which is crazy. We're then brought into a new character named Mesmer who can touch people and read their minds and read their pasts and kind of get their whole backstory by somebody. So what they do, because the female, or Kimiko, who doesn't know how to communicate or is unable to communicate, they have Mesmer and they bribe him by being able to see his child, which obviously there was some horrible thing there, and there was this really, really awkward scene where the daughter didn't really care about him, and he's like, I love you, and then nothing else happened from it, right? So he ends up being captured, or not captured, kind of made a deal with, ended up being captured after his arm broke or something, or his wrist, I don't really remember what, but he ends up reading Kimiko and figuring out their name is Kimiko, and she's been captured by a terrorist group, and they also figure out that Compound V is over there, and there is going to be terrorist superheroes, and that is a whole other issue in itself, because we end up learning a little bit that Vought ends up doing the same thing, or it's at least strongly suggested, which I completely think is the truth, to be honest with you. But then before this episode ends, two more big things happen, and that is Mesmer going to Homelander. Homelander figures out who everybody is, and Homelander kind of remembers who Butcher is. This guy looking at him at a baseball game, this guy watching him, this guy being there, and he kind of figures out who he is. He remembers who he is, even though it was 8 to 10 years ago. And Huey has also been with Annie a little bit more, and Butcher is kind of heightened right now. He's kind of even more angry than usual. Kind of warns Huey to not get involved with Annie too much. And right after that, we cut to Huey and Annie in a hotel room who have a nice conversation, and they end up having sex. Right after Butcher said all that. But Butcher has followed them. Butcher has bugs on them. Butcher knows absolutely everything that they're doing. And this is where Annie has a heart-to-heart with Huey, and she's like, I need to know that you're not a red flag. And Huey lies to her like a little bit of a piece of crap. Poor Annie, man. Annie has been nothing but unlucky this entire time. But then we're brought back to the Deep. So we have a nice romantic moment. And then what do you know? The assaulter ends up getting assaulted. This fangirl comes in, and it's such a strange scene. And I always think about like what the acting must be for this stuff, because we figure out that the Deep has gills and he is seemingly insecure about himself. She ends up not letting the Deep assault her, because that's what the Deep was about to do. So she assaults him first. And I'm unsure if it was assault, because I'm not really sure if he liked it, because he was sitting back and going like, he wasn't really fighting it. And the girl was like, oh yeah, you like having your gills fingered? Like, it was such a strange and weird thing to watch. And I'm just glad that, unlike the other clip, my wife didn't walk into that one, because that was a very, very strange clip. And so we figure out that, I don't really know if anybody could shed that light on that in the comments. I would appreciate that. I don't know if he was assaulted. I could see that being a scene where it's like, okay, he's kind of getting what he dishes out for once, but he might have liked it because he's weird. I don't know. But then we're brought over to the 7, where Homelander officially knows everything that's going on. He knows the people that killed Translucent. He knows the people that are going for him. He knows the people who left the message coming for you. And he figures out that it's the guy who Annie's been seeing. So Homelander officially hates Annie, and he really, really wants to kill her, and the people end up talking about all these horrible things that Homelander would do, but Annie is completely in the dark about this. She doesn't believe that Huey's capable of killing Translucent. She doesn't believe Huey's capable of even conspiring against her at all. So people think she's stupid. Homelander thinks she's betraying. A-Train thinks she's betraying. And Maeve just thinks she's stupid. Which, Huey did play her well. I don't think she's dumb for that. I think that she's just a good person, and a lot of good people are a little bit trusting, right? Especially girls. They could be more trusting than other people. So she doesn't believe anything, and she's really left in the dark, but everybody thinks that, besides Maeve, thinks that she's just saying that, right? So Maeve ends up saving the day from Homelander just absolutely annihilating Starlight, and Homelander kind of makes Annie Maeve's responsibility, which is really, really weird. I don't know why he wouldn't have killed her, but I guess it's for plot points maybe. But now, knowing everything about everything in the 7, A-Train ends up giving Huey a little call, holding his father hostage. And his father's a little bit strange, because he doesn't seem too bothered by it, but anyways, they kind of figure out pretty quickly that Mesmer's the one who ended up betraying them, and then Butcher ends up finding him, and before Mesmer can say anything, because he's like, it's Homelander, what'd you want me to do? Butcher just straight up murders him, which, understandable, you shouldn't have done that, Mesmer, right? So, it was I'm a little bit disappointed he died, because it would have been cool to see a mind-reading guy on the team. I always thought that was a really cool power, but we also we're brought back over to the confrontation between Huey and A-Train, and this is the big part, because this is seemingly what it was all built up to. Huey getting his revenge on A-Train, but A-Train has it on him now. A-Train has his father, but Huey, because A-Train is such a junkie, Huey says that he has Compound V, squirts it on the floor and says, I have a bigger dose, you want it, you let him go. They end up coming to a little bit of an understanding. The dad ends up leaving, and what we thought was all okay ended up not being okay, because A-Train was going to kill Huey either way. He calls him stupid for coming alone, and then Kimiko comes out and ends up crippling A-Train, and Huey just looks at him and goes, yeah, that would have been stupid to come alone, because, you know what? I actually thought that Huey was going to come alone, but again, this is following Huey in his own kind of character development. He's becoming a tougher, smarter, more vindictive person, to be honest with you. But after all that, we're brought over to Homelander, who is still pissed and still doesn't really understand what's going on. So he ends up going to a doctor who created him, I guess, and he asks him about his actual upbringing, because he was lied to all of his life. Apparently, his powers were chosen by God, and he ends up asking the doctor where he came from, and he's finally learning about everything that's going on. He's told that he has a child. He's told about Becca, and that's why we figure out that Homelander ends up going back to Becca, right? So she has his child. Homelander's child's still alive, but what happens is they claimed that the child ended up dying, but the child didn't die. And what the entire conversation ended up becoming was Homelander talking about how great he is, and the doctor saying, you're my greatest failure, because you shouldn't have been raised in a lab. You should have been raised with a loving family. You should have had a mother and a father, and Homelander didn't have that. Homelander never had that, and that's why he's kind of hurting other people. Doesn't make it okay, but it's kind of makes sense why he's so messed up. You know, a typical kid without a father in the home, right? Without especially a mother and a father in a home really makes for, to what the doctor said, to be a great failure. Other than that, Butcher is asking for protection in exchange for evidence of Compound V, protection for their families, which works for the time being, but this is where we're brought to a little bit of an emergency, and we have our first super terrorist who just ends up blowing up an entire thing. If I had to assume, that's going to be the main plot point moving forward with next season, but I hear every season of The Boys gets even better, so I'm really excited to see what that's about. But we're heading towards the end of this final of episode 7 over here, and what happens is Annie and Huey meet up again, because Annie tells Huey that you need to make sense of all of this. She ends up confronting him, getting angry, but before Huey can explain the entire situation, Annie starts not really listening to him, and Butcher shows up and wants to kill her. He shoots her. Thankfully, she survives, but this guy's too quick to kill superheroes, man. I'm interested to see if Annie and Butcher are going to have a face-off one day. Because Butcher needs to realize that Annie isn't part of these people, right? Annie is arguably the only good person in this entire series, although I could see her slipping with everything that's going on with her. But speaking of Annie being a little bit slipped in her mental state, of course, we're brought to the boys officially being classified as fugitives, and they're obviously wanted people. We're brought over to Annie confronting her mother. Her mother turns out to be a little bit of a piece of crap, right? Because her mother was very selfish. She wanted the daughter that everybody looked up to, like, my daughter this. You know those mothers, the ones that are just insufferable. My daughter, my child, look at what she's accomplished. Look at this job my son has, right? She's one of those. And I really do believe that's why she ended up giving Vought Annie. Could be wrong about that, because she said that she thought she was doing the right thing, but the father walked out because he disagreed with the whole thing. I think that's the case, and I hope that we see a little bit of a reunion with Annie and her father, but she ends up walking out on her mother after a really, really tough conversation. The mother admitted to her about everything. She sat down. She's like, what's Compound V? She's like, oh, I don't know, honey. Should I know about it? Right? And what a little man. Like, she even made that whole presentation about herself. You know, the one where Annie was talking about, like, hey, mom, you don't know what I've been through these past months. I don't want to do it. She's like, I've waited so long for this moment. Like, oh, those mothers, man. Those mothers are the absolute worst. So anyways, A-Train ends up having a little bit of a breakdown in a store because he's in crutches and his bones haven't healed yet. He just has a relapse with Compound V. He was trying to get off of it because he ended up being profiled in a store. A security guard was watching him and he freaked out on camera. So he ended up using his bones anyways, shacked up on Compound V. Everything ended up being okay, and he was working out with a train. A-Train was lifting a train. His trainer decides to not help him anymore because he's a junkie, and that's going to play a big part moving forward. But anyways, we're brought over to Butcher visiting Mallory, and this is somebody that he used to work with. We don't get a ton of information on her, but he brings Huey along, and the whole purpose of this is not really what they really talked about. They kind of figure out Homelander's weakness is Stillwell, if he does have one, and this is something I never talked about, was Stillwell ended up... They have quite the relationship, right? Her and Homelander, because Homelander's a little bit of a freak. He has serious mommy issues, and he wants... I know it's a meme, but they turned the meme into something quite serious, that being like the mommy's milkers, right? This dude's obsessed with breast milk. The dude's always watching her because he has X-ray vision. He's always watching her from behind, just looking at her rack. The guy's a little bit of a weirdo, but... yeah, and there was a scene that I didn't touch on. I don't remember what episode it was, where she ended up playing into that fetish, right? Oh, you're mommy's good boy, right? Like, who's mommy's good boy? And then she ends up teasing Homelander a little bit, right? So that's brought to Butcher's attention. But the whole purpose of the visit really is Mallory ends up warning Huey about Butcher's desire for vengeance, and that's not the way. It'll only lead to horrible things to come, and that's true. Look what's come from it so far. Butcher will do anything to get to Homelander. It's understandable, but it's not right. We're then brought back to the poor Deep. Poor Deep, who isn't getting back into the 7. He gets this news. He gets in this horrible living situation with people that are kind of shrugging him off a little bit, kind of just pretending everything's okay. And then the sad music starts playing. Poor Deep. Oh no. Poor sexual abuser. We feel so bad for him. But anyways, moving back over to Homelander, he ends up having sex with Stillwell because he reveals to her that he secretly made the super terrorist, and everything's going to be okay. Homelander's going to get into the military after that, and she ends up loving that. She ends up using Homelander as her little tool, which is really, really smart, because if you have some guy who is like Superman, he's super powerful. This is going to sound so stupid. It really is, but the way to get through to any man, no matter how powerful, is to just tease him with some tits. Like, I know that sounds dumb coming out of my mouth right now, but this is what I love about the show. The writing's phenomenal. Like, it sounds so stupid, but that's a way around a Superman. I know how that sounds, okay? I know, but I legitimately love it. We're then brought into an action scene where Kimiko ended up getting captured. They need to free her, but after a really cool action scene and Huey screaming, saying I'm sorry as he's shooting people, they end up getting a little bit cornered, and what do you know? Annie ends up coming to save the day. Annie is officially turned against the 7, or seemingly turned against the 7, and she ends up working with Huey and these other guys. They have a soup with them, and I'm very interested to see how that's going to look with Butcher, assuming that Butcher survives what he's about to go through, right? But A-Train ends up getting to them right before they leave. They tell everybody to keep running. Huey ends up staying with Annie. He's like, I'm not leaving you again. That's not happening. They have a little bit of a fight scene. A-Train looked like he was going to beat the crap out of Starlight, but then because he's so jacked up on Compound V and Huey's talking to A-Train, they have this really, really tough conversation about how at least what A-Train did was an accident. What Huey did, killing his significant other, was purposeful. And no matter what, even though Huey said, I didn't do it, he traced it all back to Huey. So Huey, it makes sense. Huey actually ended up doing it. And Huey, I don't know who's more in the wrong. They're both bad because you know the A-Train does not care. A-Train wasn't looking where he's going, and A-Train was laughing about it afterwards. He's like, I swallowed one of her molars. But haha, you know, like, they're both really, really sick people, and Huey's stuck on vengeance a little bit. Huey's also a murderer, right? Murdered is a significant other, but A-Train also admits that he's struggling because he's the one. He's the one that did it too. He's responsible for Pop Claw's death. He's responsible. He ends up having those feelings along with all the drugs in his system and the adrenaline from the fight, ends up having a heart attack. And the stupidest thing they could have done, Huey and Annie end up being good people and start giving CPR. But Huey ends up leaving. Annie says, I'll be okay. We'll call emergency services. They end up showing up. Annie ends up being the one to save the day. Huey's nowhere in sight. The boys are nowhere in sight. In the meantime, Stillwell has her boy in there, and he's just asking Homelander to take him upstairs. Everything okay? Just save my boy, because obviously she's wrapped with C4, and no matter what Homelander does, the C4, like, you can't let go of the C4 button, right? And Butcher's ready to lose everything. He just wants to make Homelander suffer. So I thought this girl was dead no matter what. But then, he, after a little bit of tough conversation, which Homelander made me second guess things a little bit, which perhaps I should have. He blows things up. Homelander, for whatever reason, saves Butcher. I still don't know why he would do that. To prove a point, I have no clue. So the kid and Stillwell officially die. No more mommy's milk for Homelander. Homelander's going to go on a little bit of a rampage after that one, unless he finds a new mommy type girl. Like, it's so strange coming out of my mouth, dude. It's crazy. And what is revealed to us, and at the end of the season, is Butcher waking up to Homelander revealing that Becca has been hidden away with a kid. She's okay. She's alive. That's it. And I'm sitting here like, oh my God, this show is picking up. Butcher's wife is alive. So what I'm thinking, and this is just off of what I've seen so far, is that she actually wasn't, she could have been taken advantage of. There's two possibilities. She's taken advantage of and she's scared, and Homelander has a secret wife, which wouldn't really make sense because of the mommy's milk thing. So I don't know how I'm feeling about that. Or maybe Homelander wasn't kidding. Maybe he was doing like those monkey branch things that girls like to do, because there was a better, more successful man in her life. And a lot of girls do this thing. As soon as a better man comes along, they jump ship. Perhaps Becca wasn't this lovely wife that Butcher thought she was. I don't know. I'm kind of thinking that Homelander might have been right, and that could have been the reason why he ended up saving Butcher, is because, who do you think I am? This girl loves me. You know that, and then he could have killed him, but I think that this is the problem with seeing memes, because I think that Butcher stays alive from the memes and the teasers from the boys that I saw. I have no clue what's going on, dude, but I cannot wait to see, man. I cannot wait to see. Crazy, dude. After all of that, turns out that Butcher was wrong. His wife's still alive. He was headhunting somebody who perhaps didn't even need to be headhunted. Could you imagine the strain that's going to be on his heart after all of these 8 years in his family, thinking that she was taken advantage of, murdered, or took her own life? And she's willingly going with Homelander? I almost don't hope that's the case, man. But this is what I love about the series. All of this I could see happening in real life. The story is, what if superheroes were real? This is what would happen. They'd all be used as PR. They would all be used for social media clicks. They would all be fake, and the public would eat it up. Absolutely eat it up. I love Annie's story. I love the way that they're taking some innocent girl who wanted to do good, and they're destroying her piece by piece. That's exactly what would happen. I think it's a phenomenal show. One of the greatest seasons of a story that I've ever watched. One of the greatest pilots I have ever watched. And I'm completely hooked. I cannot wait to watch the rest of the series. It's fantastic. Please don't spoil anything in the comments for me. I would appreciate that, because I'm really enjoying this. Let me know what you thought about Season 1 down below. Thank you very, very much for watching. If you guys are interested, check out one of these videos on screen. This is a Better Call Saul review for Season 1 if you want to check it out. And down here, YouTube thinks you'll like this video the best. Check it out in either one of those videos, guys. I will see you over there or in the next video. Take care.